Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you doing today? It's good to see you. Welcome back to my office for today's lecture. I got my whiteboard all out of whack today, so I had to put that back in the correct place. Hope everybody's having a good week so far. We're in week 3 of the class and week 3 of the semester. I hope your math classes, your English classes, your history classes, your communication classes, and your ACA classes are all going well so far for you this semester. It's always difficult to try to find a rhythm in online classes, so the best way to be successful is to set in and try to figure out that weekly rhythm of work, which allows you to get all your stuff done in a timely manner. Remember, a lot of teachers are not going to allow you to turn in late work here at Wake Tech. So if you're a high school student who's used to being able to wait until the last day of the semester to turn your work in, do not do that here. It's not going to work at Wake Tech. Okay, I hope everybody had a chance to see the video that I sent earlier. Did everybody get to see the video of D. Dowd's Sleepy Man earlier today that I sent around? That was a story about a fellow named D. Dowd who has narcolepsy, which is caused by a malfunctioning of the neurons in the hypothalamus, which leads one's sleep cycles to get all messed up. Can I resend it? I can definitely resend it, and that's why I was over here looking as I was typing. Mr. Sleepy. Okay, you can't watch it now. It's a 10-minute video, so it will definitely interact with your ability to watch this lecture. But I am going to put it in the chat bar, and it's going in the chat bar right now. You are never late, Whitaker. I am always good to see you. Alan, maybe you didn't sign up for the Remind texting chat. I sent it through Remind earlier today. Yes, it will be absolutely shocking if you watch it. Amazingly shocking. Actually, if you haven't signed up for Remind yet, remember you get 2 points extra credit for doing that, and you get your 2 credits. Your 2 credits by texting text at Spring 21 PSY 150 to 81010, and you'll get text reminders about homeworks, lectures, lecture links, and any other videos that I find that I think might be useful for you. I totally get that, Alan. Can't say no to the little baby girl. I totally get that. I'm in my sweatsuit today. I'm feeling all comfortable here in the office. So let's go ahead and get started. It is sad but funny. That's a good point. I mean, it's easy to laugh at a guy falling down in the middle of a park, but it's sad to think about it if that was your life. And I totally understand that. The fellow has to wear a crash helmet walking around his house because he just falls out right in the middle of things. He can't drive. He can't go out alone. A lot of things that you and I take for granted are completely off limits to this fellow because he does have this disease. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the sleep and wake cycle. We're going to start by talking about circadian rhythms. We're going to talk about how we cycle through sleep during the course of the night. We're going to talk about specifically a little bit about REM sleep. And then we're going to talk about sleep disorders. So let's go ahead and get started if we can. Okay, circadian rhythm is the 24-hour cycle of sleeping and waking that all of us go through every day. It controls our biological processes, including sleeping and waking. What is controlled by the time of day? Well, of course, your level of arousal. You're either sleeping or waking. Hormone production is affected by time of day. Cortisol is a stress hormone that makes you that arouses your system, and it is highest at first thing in the morning, and it tips off and it kind of vacillates throughout the day, and it drops to really low levels at night when you go to sleep. Did you know your body temperature also changes throughout the day? How many of you have ever felt quite warm going to sleep at night and you didn't think you needed your covers on you, but then you kick your covers off during the middle of the night and you wake up freezing? That's because your body temperature changes. Our body temperature drops just as we go to sleep at night. and it starts to rise just before we wake up in the morning. So your body temperature is controlled by the time of day. And you folks probably all have to wake up first thing in the morning, having to go to the bathroom. Your urination, urine production is also affected by the time of day. Now, all of this is controlled by a small set of neurons in your hypothalamus called the supracosmetic nucleus. And you'll see the picture right here in the left-hand corner of the bottom left-hand corner of the slide. And the supracosmetic nucleus and the pineal gland are kind of two glands that regulate the sleep cycle. Now, there are other parts of the brain that are responsible for sleeping as well, especially when we go into REM sleep. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But I wanted to stop for a moment and talk about the supracosmetic nucleus and the pineal gland. The supracosmetic nucleus is your time clock. That is the time center of your brain that causes you to wake up and go to sleep on a 24-hour of sleeping and waking. If your supracosmetic nucleus is damaged, you will lose all periodicity of sleep. Any of you who have a new baby, like you, Alin, notice that during the first couple of weeks of your life, your baby did not seem to have any particular sleep cycle. The baby might sleep for 2 hours in the middle of the night and then wake up for the rest of the night. Then the baby might be sleepy all day. And your baby had this intermittent pattern of sleeping and waking that didn't really seem to show a pattern. This is because the supracosmetic nucleus is not yet functioning in the first couple of weeks of life. Once it starts to function, your brain will sleep and wake on roughly a 24-hour cycle, with a period of sleep roughly about 8 to 9 hours and a period of waking that represents the other 17 to 18 hours of the day. Now, the neat thing is your supracosmetic nucleus actually receives afferents or sensory neurons from your eyes. So the sunlight that comes into your eyes goes to the back of your the supracosmetic nucleus, and it actually impairs the function of your supracosmetic nucleus during the day. It puts your supracosmetic nucleus to sleep. I'll stop real quick. Good question, Whitaker Bennett. Actually, what happened was he's got not damage, but probably a genetic problem in his pineal gland. Pineal gland, along with producing the melatonin that I have here on the slide, actually produces this neurotransmitter called hypocretin. And the hypocretin producing neurons in your pineal gland are damaged, which causes him not to be able to get into REM sleep when he goes to sleep at night. And then during the day, your brain needs REM sleep every day to repair itself. And so what happens is his body demands REM sleep at bizarre and awkward times. And when you go into REM sleep, your pons relaxes your muscles. And so what happens when he goes into REM sleep in the middle of the day, his muscles relax and he falls right over. But that's a little bit ahead of me right now. But a very good question, Winokur. Very good question. And at the same time, Elon Musk Neuralinks, fix that. Woo! Elon Musk and all his nifty little projects are beyond the scope of this class, Whitaker. But I will certainly Google that after class, because now you've stoked my interest. Meanwhile, welcome to you, Will Farrell, for showing up a bit late after I already said the hellos to everybody, but it's good to see you here. Thanks for coming. So the supracosmetic nucleus receives afferents from your eyes. It's sensitive to light. And so while it's receiving light, it doesn't send a message to its pineal gland. And the pineal gland kind of starts your sleep cycle at night. So as long as the sun's out, you notice how humans sleep during the night and stay awake during the day. So the supracosmetic nucleus receiving these afferents from the eyeballs actually keeps us on our diurnal schedule. People who have nerve blindness sometimes have difficulty sleeping. Their sleep schedule isn't aligned with the sun like ours are. Excuse me. And yes, That's a good question. Matthew Hodge says that's tough for people who work at night shifts. Yes. Even if you work at night shifts for 20 years, your body's biological processes will not adapt. You will still be at your lowest level of arousal in the middle of the night. Even if you're trained and you try to sleep during the day, your body's physiological processes are still observing this 24-hour cycle. And this is why you're going to get more accidents in the middle of the night than you get during the day, because people's arousal, alertness, awakeness is at its lowest ebb. That's a really good question, Matthew. Now, the supracosmetic nucleus sends efferents to the pineal gland. So I would say that the pineal gland receives afferents from the supracosmetic nucleus. And when the the sun sets, the supracosmetic nucleus quits sending afferents to the pineal gland, which then begins producing melatonin at night, which begins the sleep process. In fact, if any of you have ever had trouble sleeping at night or have suffered from jet lag, you may or may not have had a doctor recommend that you try melatonin to help you overcome this sleep problem. Absolutely. Keisha asked a question about jet lag. That's a great question, Keisha. What happens in jet lag is you automatically, due to the modern technology, you change your position relative to the sun 4 to 6 to 8 hours at any given time. So your body thinks it's the middle of the night, but you've actually flown from Abu Dhabi all the way over to Texas, and your eyes are telling you it's nighttime, but your body is telling you it's daytime, or the opposite, whatever it should be. And the experience of jet lag is your body trying to reacclimate to the new position of the sun. Now, if you change your position relative to the sun in jet, like you do in east or west airfare, that results in jet lag, after a couple of days, your body resets itself to the new position of the sun, and your jet lag symptoms go away. That's a really good question, Keisha. Thank you for asking that. Now, the other structure we're going to talk about that's in this class that we talked about in Chapter 2 is the pons. There's a structure in your pons that's responsible for relaxing your muscles during REM sleep. How many of you had those crazy chili burritos, scary dreams at night where somebody's trying to kill you, or you're chasing somebody trying to catch them, or you're being attacked by aliens or whatnot? If you didn't have your pons making your muscles relaxed, you would kick and thrash about. In fact, there are people who suffer from a sleep disorder called RBD, REM behavioral disorder, and their pons doesn't work correctly, paralyzing them, and so these people thrash about during their dreams and often hurt themselves and their sleep partners. Any questions so far? I'm going to click on to the next slide. Now, the major tool that's used in sleep research and sleep treatments is the EEG machine, an electroencephalogram. An electroencephalogram measures the electrical activity of your brain. And what they do is they put, I think it's something like 20 or 30 electrodes. They glue them to the outside of your head. Has anybody in here ever had an EEG before? I had an EEG when I was about 9 years old because I used to have really bad headaches as a kid. And one of the things they did was measure the electrical activity in my brain. And each of these electrical links that they glue to your head measures the electrical activity that is occurring in that little area. And so they put some electrodes in your frontal lobe, some electrodes on your temporal lobe, some electrodes on your parietal lobe, and some electrodes on your occipital lobe. Now, okay, Zoe got one a couple of years ago. Yeah, they glue those little electrodes to your head. It's kind of weird. At least that's what they did for me. I'm not sure back in the 1970s. I'm not sure how they do it now, Zoe. Now, EEGs are not very specific. They don't tell you what exact Brodmann area is being active. They certainly don't tell you what neuron is being active. Instead, an EEG is kind of like standing outside of the sports arena on a Saturday afternoon. You hear the roar of the crowd, and you can probably guess which end of the field the touchdown was scored on, or the goal was scored on, but you can't tell who scored it, how they scored it, or any details. So the EEG just measures the electrical roar of different areas of the brain in a very general way. Now, oddity, interesting historical note, it was actually invented by a Nazi scientist, Hans Berger, who was trying to look for psychic energy. He thought he had an experience as a kid and thought that psychic energy was real. So he tried to create an instrument to measure it as an adult, working for the Nazis as a scientist, and he actually invented the EEG machine. He was the first person who argued that the brain is always active. You might think when you go to sleep, your brain becomes inactive. It doesn't. Its activity just changes in quality and location when you change. Now, the first electrical wave your brain actually creates different types of electrical activity that differ in amplitude, which is how high up the wave goes, and wavelength, which is how wide and slow the wave is. So if you have a high amplitude wave, or you can have a low amplitude wave, or you can have a short wavelength, or you can have a long wavelength. If you look at the chart over on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see different types of electrical activity created by your brain during your day awake, your 24-hour cycle, and you'll see that they differ in amplitude and also frequency. Now, the first people he measured with the EEG mean were kind of chilling out and just relaxing in the chair, and he measured their electrical activity, and he named these waves that he discovered alpha waves, because he didn't realize that the brain activity changed depending upon what you're doing. Now, after that, he changed these people's activity and had them focus on activities, and he realized that the alpha waves went away and beta waves occurred when somebody was awake and focused. Hopefully you're paying attention to this lecture right now. If you're focusing on Dr. Roddenberry, your brain is generating beta waves. If you've lost interest in my lecture and you're kind of half daydreaming and thinking about all the things you need to do, your brain is probably generating alpha waves. If you've ever laid on the couch watching TV and you're kind of in and out of consciousness between being awake and being asleep, where you can kind of see and hear the TV, but you're not really aware of it, your brain is probably creating theta waves, which is the drowsy, half-asleep electrical waves. Once you truly fall asleep, your theta waves are going to be joined by these little spikes called sleep spindles, and you can see them here in stage 2 on the left-hand side of the screen in part D, as well as these K complexes, which aren't really discussed in your book, so I don't have them here on the review sheets. You won't see K complexes on the test or the homework, but K complexes and sleep spindles are sort of like the hallmarks of true sleep. And then if you've ever been dead to the world, man, like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, where a train could drive by and you wouldn't hear it, you know what I mean? I'm talking dead asleep. Your brain activity, the waves change in quality, and they have these real high amplitude and really big wavelength, and you can see these delta waves right down here. In fact, deep sleep or delta sleep is a particular type of sleep that we all go through during the night. Any questions so far? I'm going to wait for just a moment and take a sip of my cold coffee. Freaking horrible, man. I got to find a way to keep my coffee hotter. Actually, I just need to get one of those coffee mugs. I've got the open cup here, and it just stays cold. Okay, we're good so far. Thank you very much for letting me know, Sandy. I'm staring at a camera right here sometimes, and it's hard to see if I'm getting through. All right, now, during the night, when you do go to sleep, your brain cycles back and forth between different types or sleep spindles where you dream. Good question. Yes, some of this is on the homework, but the K complex I don't think is. It shouldn't be on the homework. it might be. If it is, Aileen, you can tell me. Oops. Okay, no, that's a good question, Haley. Actually, sleep spindles occur in light sleep when you're not dreaming. We're going to talk about REM sleep in just a second, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So, as you fall asleep, when you go to sleep, let's say your body temperature starts to drop and your cortisol level is at its lowest level and your pineal gland has been producing melatonin for several hours and it's midnight. You fall asleep. And as you fall into sleep, you start to circle. And you'll see this chart right underneath me that shows you stage 1, stage 2, and slow wave sleep. And as you look along the x-axis, you'll notice that there's 8 hours of sleep. Some of you don't get 8. I bet a lot of you don't get 8. A lot of you don't get 8. But let's say you got 8 hours of sleep. So the first hour of sleep, second hour of sleep, third hour of sleep, fourth hour of sleep. And what I want you to notice is that your brain cycles back and forth between stage 1, stage 2, and slow wave sleep about 5 or 6 times a night. And you bounce in between these different stages. And as these stages occur, your brain electrical activity changes. So the first stage of true sleep is what we would call stage 2 or light sleep. And this is when your brain is generating theta waves and you finally see the sleep spindles and K complexes. As long as you're just having theta waves, you're sort of in that drowsy, almost asleep area. But once your brain starts generating sleep spindles and K complexes, you are what scientists call truly asleep. And that's the first stage of sleep that normal people who have a normal sleep cycle go into. And as I've got noted on the board right here, we spend 50% of our sleep cycle in light sleep. And you'll notice we cycle back and forth, and we're in this blue bar many times during the night. And that's that light sleep cycle when our brain's generating theta waves, sleep spindles, and K complexes. Okay? Now, after about 15, 20, 25 minutes, your brain activity begins to change and you begin, those theta waves and sleep spindles begin to be replaced by delta waves, those big, slow, sloppy looking waves. And that represents your lowest level of arousal. If you get woken up out of deep sleep, you will be confused and you will have trouble figuring out where you are and who's talking to you. If I wake you up out of light sleep, you'll be immediately aroused and awake and ready to answer the question. If I wake you up during deep sleep, you're going to be confused because you are definitely out. You're at your lower level of arousal. Now, we get most of our deep sleep, our delta sleep, early in the sleep period. So what I want you to look at is this graph underneath me. You'll see how we go to stage 2 and then we go to slow wave sleep. And then we go to stage 2 and come up to REM sleep. And we cycle back and forth down into the slow wave sleep. And you'll notice we do it 3 times during the night. But as we get towards the 5th and 6th hour of our sleep cycle, we're not going into deep sleep anymore. So we get most of our deep sleep early in the sleep cycle. So if you go to bed at 12, from 12 to about 4 is when you're super duper zonked. After about 4 a.m., you probably notice maybe the birds, the cars, the garbage man, garbage person, any of these other sounds can wake you up out of your sleep. Now, the interesting thing about sleep is that your sleep cycle changes as you get older. And one of the things that happens as we get older is we lose the ability to get into deep sleep. So if you talk to your parents who are in their 50s or your grandparents, they're probably going to complain about not getting good enough sleep, having trouble getting sleep, having trouble going to sleep, waking up too early. And so you're going to find that deep sleep begins to disappear in 50s, and actually people are more likely to have sleep-related complaints as they move later in life. So I'm 51, so I'm probably not getting into deep sleep, or I'm going to start losing my deep sleep as I move through my 50s. Okay? Now, you'll notice we go in, and when you fall asleep at the beginning of hour 0, You go into stage 1, which is where you're theta waves and you're not quite asleep, but then you fall into stage 2, light sleep. You're in light sleep for a while, then you go into slow wave sleep, and then your brain activity changes and it becomes, and you start to see the delta waves go away and you start to see theta waves and sleep spindles, and you go back up into light sleep. And then your brain jumps into what looks like awakeness, but you actually aren't awake. You are just as deep asleep in terms of being groggy as you would be if you're in delta sleep. But instead, your brain starts to generate these alpha waves, which actually look like you're awake and aroused, and different parts of your brain become active. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And this is when we do most of our dreaming. Now, they've done tons of sleep studies where they wake people up during different stages, and it turns out we don't do all of our dreaming in REM sleep. We do about 80% of our dreaming in REM sleep. But the really visual dreams, the really scary dreams, those happen during REM sleep. Typically, the dreams that we have in other parts of our sleep stage are usually less visual, kind of muddy, and they definitely aren't very emotional. But if you've ever had one of those scary dreams, you had it during REM sleep. And what happens is we cycle back and forth with this REM sleep every night. You'll notice that the person goes through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 REM periods every night when we dream. And you'll notice we get more of our REM periods towards the end of our sleep cycle, which is why most of you remember your dreams, because if you remember a dream when you wake up, it's because you accidentally woke up during a REM stage. That happens quite frequently. Now, REM dreams, the images in REM dreams aren't processed by your hippocampus. If you'll remember from chapter 2, I told you that your hippocampus is responsible for making memories permanent. And this is why you can't remember your dreams even 2 or 3 minutes after you wake up. Some of you probably remember a dream, and by the time you get up and go to tell somebody, you've already forgotten most of your dream. It's because the images are not processed by the hippocampus, so they quickly fade from your memory after 10 to 15 seconds. If you're the kind of person that says, I don't dream, chances are you habitually wake up during stage 2 or during slow wave sleep. And I've heard, I don't know, but you can, if you set your alarm half an hour earlier or half an hour later, you might find yourself waking up in the middle of REM sleep and noticing that, hey, you do have dreams. Omar has a question I want to answer real quick. How consistent is this chart between people? Everybody who has normal sleep, unless you have narcolepsy, everybody follows this chart, Omar. Very good. Sleeping and waking, if you think about it, everybody sleeps and wakes during a 24-hour period, this circadian rhythm, and we have the same sort of periodicity everyone does during this sleep as well. So we all cycle back and forth, and it's usually stage 2, deep sleep, stage 2, REM, stage 2, deep sleep, stage 2, REM. So everybody's pretty consistent with this type of sleep pattern. That's a very good question, Omar. That's a very good question. But as the day goes on, you remember it. Now, here's the deal, Ikenna. If you remember your dream when you wake up and then start talking about it immediately after your dream, your hippocampus then engages. So if you wake up and start talking about your dream right then, before that image goes out of your head, and talk about it, you then process that through your hippocampus. Then it's not a dream image, then it becomes a memory, and you can remember it later on in the day. Does that make sense, Ikenna? But basically, you would have to process that dream image right after you wake up when your hippocampus is awake. All right? Now, here's the deal. What happens if you stay up and pull an all-nighter? How many of you have ever pulled an all-nighter studying for an exam when you didn't go to sleep? You probably felt like crap the next day a little bit, and that's too many, yeah, right? Of course, and you feel like crap the next day. Well, when you go back to sleep, what it turns out, we do not have to recoup all of the sleep that we need. If you lost sleep last night, You do not need to sleep 16 hours tonight in order to catch up. That's a common misconception. However, your brain has to make up the REM sleep. So if you lose an hour and a half of REM sleep tonight, your body will make that up by going into REM sleep more frequently and for longer periods of time tomorrow night. This is called REM rebound. If I prevent you from getting REM sleep, in fact, what they do is they do these cool experiments where they put people in a sleep lab, and every time they get ready to go into REM sleep, they'll wake them up. And let them get 8 hours of non-REM sleep. And it turns out that the person is just as groggy and as uncomfortable as if they didn't sleep that night. And when they go to sleep the next night, they don't sleep any longer, but their brain has extra REM sleep, which makes up for the missed REM sleep. So we don't have to make up all of the sleep. We just have to make up the REM sleep. Now, if I was to keep you up 5, 6, 7 days and really stress out your sleep cycle, you would fall directly into REM sleep. Your body wouldn't even worry about stage 2 or slow wave sleep. You would just immediately fall right into REM sleep. Now, why is this interesting? Well, you notice D. Dowd is narcoleptic. And what happens to people like D. Dowd is their hypothalamus doesn't create the hypocretin, which allows them, their sleep cycles don't look like this. Omar, you asked a question. You said, does all people's sleep cycle look like this? No. People who have narcolepsy do not have this smooth, wonderful-looking cyclic sleep structure. And in fact, they may not get their REM sleep at night because of this hypocretin-producing neurons aren't allowing them to get into REM sleep at night. And so what happens to D. Dowd is he falls into REM sleep in the middle of the day. So it'll be 9:30 in the morning, he'll be walking in the park or washing dishes, and his brain will immediately click into REM sleep, and the paralysis and the loss of consciousness will immediately happen. And he'll fall down on the ground, and then it'll take him a minute or two to wake back up. And so that's what happens in narcolepsy and why you have the loss of muscle tone. They call that cataplexy. And so that's why narcoleptics often have this cataplexy. He'll just fall right into REM sleep in the inopportune times, and his brain will just lose all muscle tone, and he'll fall out. Any questions so far? Looks like we have a lot of people pulling all-nighters. Get your butts to sleep. Get your butts to sleep. Your body will thank you for it, okay? Now, let's talk briefly about REM sleep. Now, the weird thing is with REM sleep, your brain not only is less active, it is just as active as if you were asleep. Paradoxically, even though you're dead asleep, your brain is just as awake and just as active as if you were awake. So the brain activity has these little low frequency, low amplitude waves that are generally the same as if you're focused, if you're awake and sort of drowsy. And so the weird thing is your brain is just as active when you're asleep. Now, the weird thing is your frontal lobe activity is depressed. And your frontal lobe is responsible for reasoning, planning, and impulse control. And this is why your dreams don't make any sense and you do crazy things in your dream. Because the part of your brain that controls reasoning and impulses and organization is not as active. So that's why we have these crazy dreams. I used to coach the Wake Tech baseball team. I helped coach the Wake Tech baseball team. And I had this crazy dream the other night that I was taking my Wake Tech baseball players from 5 years ago on a field trip to Boston, to the famous baseball field, Fenway Park. And we were climbing over the fence and riding trains and doing all this crazy stuff just to get into the park. It didn't make a doggone bit of sense. But I was having all of these images, but they weren't logically put together. And that's why your dreams are a little bit crazy. Now, what's more active in your brain is the amygdala. This is why your REM dreams are so scary. Your amygdala is activated, and that's your fear. The part of your brain that's responsible for fear and anger and stuff. And that's why you have such emotional content in your REM dreams. Now, your pons, as I suggested to you, your pons paralyzes you so that you can't kick about. And your motor cortex, which is that stripe at the back of your frontal lobe, is more active. And that's why we run and try to get away from things in our dream. Our body's moving around in our dreams because our motor cortex is moving it around. Now, the reason you don't actually move around is because your pons has paralyzed you. And then you have these visual association areas. Your vision center is very active. And that's why your REM dreams are so visual. You see scary monsters. So you're seeing these images, your amygdala makes some scary images, and then your motor cortex makes you run away. And so in your dream, you're seeing scary images that you're running away from, but your pons doesn't allow you to dream, right? Now, why do we dream? $1,000,000 question. Nobody really knows why we dream. But however, your book is going to talk about 3 theories of dreaming. And I have another misspelling here. Subconscious should have an SC, not a CC. I apologize for that. Your book talks about 3 broad theories of dreaming. And honestly, nobody knows. There's no experimental way to demonstrate which one of these is true. Now, the oldest dream theory was posited by a guy named Sigmund Freud. I think I told you a couple of weeks ago he was the first rock star. He was the first rock star in psychology. And he thought that human beings were driven by unconscious desires of this part of our brain he called the id, which is German for it. And he thought the id has all these desires that it wanted to live through and all these fears that it wanted to experience during the day, but it was controlled by your conscience, and you couldn't do that mean thing that you want. You couldn't do that sexy thing that you want. You couldn't do all of these things that you were either afraid to or desired. And he argued that when we went to sleep at night, our frontal lobe, he didn't call it our frontal lobe, he called it the superego, or our conscience, relaxed itself and went to sleep. And that's when our id got to live out its desires in dreamlike state. So if you've ever been, I used to have dreams of missing my alarm clock and being late for work and having my boss yell at me. I would argue that represented, me being afraid about missing work. And so he thought that our dreams were just ways in which we lived out our subconscious fears and desires. What's going on when you have a lucid dream? You know, your textbook doesn't talk about that, so I usually don't talk about that much in class, but that is a good question, Arian. Lucid dreams are those dreams that people actually feel like they sort of have control over what's going on in your dream. And I don't think science has a really good question about why we have lucid dreaming, or even if we can really achieve lucid dreaming. Arian, you've probably seen people who say that there are strategies where they can train you to control your dreams. I would argue that this is just a REM dream, and I'm not sure. People vary in the feelings that they have inside their REM dreams. And so I think lucid dreams are just extraordinarily vivid dreams, and some people sort of have the feeling that they can control them. Really good question, Arian. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for that. Now, there are lots of historical stories, legendary stories of people who came up with really cool ideas or figured things out in their dreams. I'm a huge classic rock and roll fan, and I always heard that Keith Richards wrote the song Jumpin' Jack Flash in a dream. It's said that he woke up in the middle of a dream, grabbed his guitar, turned on his 4-track recorder, and played the introduction to Jumpin' Flash. And then he fell right back over, went to sleep, and the whole 4 hours of the recorder tape went, and he woke up in the middle of in the next morning and saw that his tape had been running for 4 hours. He rewound it back and realized that he had written a really cool song while he was asleep. The famous Albert Einstein is said to have dreamed of a train coming into a train station that gave him the idea for the theory of relativity. And if any of you have ever read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's said that Robert Louis Stevenson dreamed up the characters of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So there are some people who argue that we are solving problems when we are dreaming, and we do it in non-typical problem-solving strategies. Have you ever heard of thinking outside of the box? Well, your frontal lobe organizes your thinking, and sometimes your frontal lobe prevents you from thinking outside of the box because your frontal lobe says that doesn't make any sense. You can't think like that. That's not a good way to deal with this problem. And sometimes people get locked into a solution and they miss obvious or ingenious ideas because their brain is being controlled by the frontal lobe. Rosalind Cartwright argues that dreams represent non-typical problem-solving strategies that are not possible during the day. It's your brain still trying to solve problems, but it's freed from its shackles, so it can sometimes come up with creative dreams. Okay? Now, the one that makes the most sense to me is called the activation synthesis of dreaming. And what they argue is that dreams are just a result of your brain's attempts to make sense of random activity. So, I'm dreaming, my visual area is seeing things that may or may not make sense. My motor cortex is moving body parts of mine that can't or maybe shouldn't be moving at this time. And there's a part of your brain that is responsible for organizing your behavior and sensations so that when you move around in the real world, you see things and move around things properly. According to the activation synthesis theory, dreams, because if you ever notice, dreams have some content of real things that happen, and they're also fantastical at the same time. The activation synthesis of theory of dreaming says that your brain puts these random signals together the best it can and comes up with a story that likely makes sense. So, let's say I was at work today and I was at the candy machine getting a Snickers bar, and my friend Ted came up to me and said, "Hey, we're all going up to Virginia to go whitewater rafting. Would you like to go with us?" And I say, "Wow, that would be a great idea." And then I get a text from my mom saying, "Chris, you never call me. Why don't you call me? You would be such a better son if you called me." And my mom makes me feel really guilty. So I fall asleep tonight and I have a dream. And suddenly I'm floating down a river in West Virginia on a Snickers bar with my mom behind me telling me, "You're not paddling right, Chris. You're not paddling right." So do you see how my brain has put these three things that happened to me today in sort of as much sense as it possibly can? Does that make sense? I hope you understand that. Another sip of cold coffee. Actually, I can't do it. It's going to be the end of that. We're going to have to switch to water. Okay, good deal. Let's move on. One last thing. Now, sleep actually changes across the lifespan. You notice little babies sleep a lot more than do young children. Young children don't sleep more than young adults. And as you get older, you start to need even less sleep. And so let's talk about how sleep changes across the lifespan. As you look at this graph right below me, you'll notice that you have three types of sleep. The non-REM sleep, which is the stage 2, and then the REM sleep, which is the deep sleep that I showed you on the last graph, and then there's waking, which is the amount of time you spend waking. So you'll notice up the y-axis we have 24 hours, and then across the x-axis we have age, and you see infancy, childhood and adolescence and old age. Now, infants sleep 16 to 20 hours a day, and they spend most of that time in REM sleep. Now, why do infants spend 8 hours a day in REM sleep? We don't know exactly why we have REM sleep, but we think that REM sleep helps program the brain's pathways. So one of the first things you have to learn is very important is how to move your arms and your legs, how to crawl, how to walk, how to talk. These are very big learning tasks that you have to do during the first 2 years of your life. You have to learn an amazing amount of things your first two years in life. And so researchers think that REM sleep helps develop the neural pathways that will control these more important behaviors. And in fact, research has shown that when people are trying to learn new things, their brain actually experiences a slight bump and uptick in the REM sleep. So while we don't know for sure, we think that REM sleep is important for the neural development that accompanies memory and learning. Infants don't start out very cyclical. Like I said, the first 2 months may be hell because your child isn't sleeping on a smooth 24 pattern. But have hope. Consolidation theory. I'm sorry, I've just seen your comment, Yasmin. Yes, consolidation. Well, consolidation theory is a little bit different. We'll talk about that in Chapter 7. Very good point to bring up there, Yasmin. Remind me to talk about that when we get to Chapter 7, memory. And we'll talk about consolidation and the reconsolidation of memory. Now, as you move into adolescence, childhood and adolescence, if you look at the chart here, about 2 years of age, kids really still are sleeping, should be sleeping about 12 hours a day. Typically what they do is they'll sleep 8 to 10 hours at night, and then they'll have a good morning nap and a good afternoon nap. And then as they move into their 2s and 3s, either the morning nap or the afternoon nap will drop away. And then after a while, sort of 5 or 6, the kids' naps, or 4, the kids' naps will go away. Now, these daytime naps do not affect your child's ability to sleep at night. They're still going to get their 8 to 10 at night, but they're also going to have the naps during the day. So your children around 2 are going to start sleeping about 12 hours a day, but as you move into late adolescence, you should be getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep as a teenager. Some of you young folks are not getting enough sleep, and I would caution you to try and improve your sleep amount. Right? Now, the ratio of REM sleep drops to adult ratio in early childhood. Now, actually, we spend about 20%, 25% of our sleep time as adults in REM sleep. So as an adult, you're sleeping 8 hours a night, you're getting about 2 hours of REM sleep. Right? And so that adult ratio of REM sleep drops to pretty much normal in early childhood. And just remember, you may not remember dreaming, but you do go through REM sleep every night. I'm not going to say you're dreaming, but I am going to say you are going in REM sleep, which is when dreams typically happen. Now, for adulthood, most of you need somewhere between 6 to 8 hours a day. Everybody's a little bit different. If I get less than 6 hours a day of sleep, I am useless. Some people are not useless on 4 and 5 hours. I got to have closer to 7 or 8, or I am just not much good. Now, the ratio of REM sleep still stays 25% through your entire life. However, as I mentioned on the earlier slide, your deep sleep does begin to disappear in the late 50s, and almost half of all people 50 and older do report sleep disturbances. Wow, Omar, look at you. Omar can't sleep. You're one of them soldier types, man. If you sleep more than 7, you can't focus. Now, I admit, when my sleep runs on to 9 hours, if it does run on to 9 hours, which is not often, I usually have that blah, yucky feeling. But I gotta have at least 6, or I am just totally useless. Okay, sleep disorders. I'm running out of time here. Sleep disturbance is a common feature in many psych disorders. When we talk about Chapter 14, psych disorders, what you're going to find is almost every psych disorder has a disruption of sleep as being an essential part of it. Now, 12 to 20% of adults suffer from insomnia. Some people have sleep onset insomnia where they can't go to sleep. Other people have sleep interruption insomnia where they wake up so often during the night it disrupts their sleep. Insomnia is associated with depression, and a major cause of it is worrying about sleep. In Chapter 14, we'll talk about cognitive behavioral therapy as a way to improve your sleep cycle. But the deal is, if you want to sleep better, quit worrying about sleep. And I would advise you try to stay away from long-term use of Ambien and all of those other sleep aids. They are highly addictive and not good for you. Sleep apnea, most common in middle-aged men, and this is if you've ever heard your father or your mother snoring. This snoring is sometimes a sign of sleep apnea. Now, it turns out that sleep, when you're snoring, basically you have a blockage in your throat, which leads you to not get enough oxygen in. You have a spot in your medulla who's responsible for measuring the amount of oxygen in your blood. To keep you from dying, when your oxygen level drops too low, your medulla shocks you awake, even for half a second. You wake up, do that loud snore, take a breath of air in, and you go to sleep. And you know what? You may wake up 100 times a night and not even know it. But you wake up in the morning and you're dead tired, and you're like, wow, I got 8 hours of sleep, but I still feel crappy. It's because sleep apnea is stopping you from getting into that good sleep cycle during the night. And a lot of times being overweight or smoking is associated with sleep apnea, so doctors may suggest you try to lose some weight, or they may put a CPAP machine on you that forces air down your throat so that you don't have the sleep apnea during the night. Now, you saw D-Dog, he had the disrupted sleep cycle at night, which leads a person to fall directly into REM sleep during the day. I highly suggest you watch that video. It is absolutely shocking. That's one REM sleep disorder. Another REM sleep disorder is what I mentioned earlier, REM behavioral disorder. And this is when your PONS does not paralyze the body while sleeping. And these people thrash about during their dreams. They may hurt themselves, they may fall out of bed, and they may hurt their sleep partners. There is a medication to help people with REM behavioral disorders. And sleepwalking and sleep talking, it's not so much as a disorder, but it's a typical thing that you're going to see in kids and less common in adults. And it's when you walk or talk during your sleep cycle. Now, here's the crazy thing. Sleepwalking and sleep talking is not related to REM sleep. It actually happens in deep sleep or delta sleep. I'm going to ask you that on the test, so don't fall in the trap thinking that sleepwalking and sleep talking is related to REM sleep. Whenever my wife talks in her sleep, I always listen, hoping she's going to tell me about that new guy she might be talking to, but she never does, so either she's clever at hiding it or she's not talking to a new guy. Okay, I'm sorry to keep you 51 minutes. I hope this hadn't been a boring lecture. I've enjoyed talking to you today. It's been a good lecture. I feel great. My throat's not hurting, which is nice. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yeah, right? You got to listen to those dreams. It was great to see everybody. Hope you get enough sleep, Whitaker. Matt, it's good to see you. All right, if you don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and log off for today's lecture. If you do have questions, don't hesitate to send me an email or a remind text. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next Monday for our virtual lecture. You folks take care.